Meet Chris Burke, creator of Mandible Judy, a sci-fi horror podcast that has spawned 2 spinoffs, Under Dead Water and Becalmed.
Over a long career, Chris has journeyed from music to sound design all the way to writing, directing, and producing his own podcast series.
Welcome to Scratch Claw Push, a podcast about artists clawing out a place for themselves in the world. I'm Billy Jo Cones.
And I'm Brendan Duke. Let's go. Welcome to the show, Mr. Chris Burke.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here with you guys.
All right, so at the outset, we like to do a thing we call the 60-second intro. Think of this as like you giving your elevator pitch of yourself or your verbal resume, the one pager, not the full CV. So we're going to give you 60 seconds. Billy, do you want to do the timer?
Yeah, ready?
Okay, so Billy's going to tell you go, and you tell us who you are and what you do and try to get it within 60 seconds.
Okay.
Okay, 3, 2, 1, go.
Hi, I'm Chris Burke, and I'm a musician, composer, performer, and writer. And I've been since 2019, I've been doing something called Mandible Judy, which is an audio drama podcast available on most streaming services. And I've been really loving it. It's kind of scratches the itch of horror for me, which is a big love of mine since I was a kid. Most salient fact about me is that when I was about 20, I went to the Museum of Modern Art and there was a garbage bin outside, like a street bin. I pulled a piece of metal out of the garbage bin and I went into the offices of the Museum of Modern Art and tried to sell it to them. True story.
Did they bite?
No, they treated me very nicely, very respectfully. They didn't want to just outright say, "You're no artist. What are you? You're just some kid who pulled some junk out of it." But I literally said, "No, I just pulled this out of the garbage in the front."
It's found art.
Yeah.
All right, time. Found art. That's amazing. So what inspired you to do that at the time?
I think I had been inside and I saw a Marcel Duchamp exhibit, and Duchamp was like one of my very first loves in the art world. I was going to film school at the time at NYU, and I didn't minor. I minored in cinema studies, like basically film history. But my other great love at the time were all the art classes I was taking, like history, theory, and all that stuff mostly. And so I saw a bunch of Duchamp, and he had some pretty, he originated ready-mades, like which were basically found objects that he positioned as art in whatever way. So
nice.
It inspired me.
So film school. So you're like all around artist. Like sounds like you do a little bit of everything.
I worked in the film business for a while. I was actually, I wanted to, everybody wants to be a director, of course. I was thinking maybe I could be a writer. At one point, I think in my senior year, I decided I was going to be an editor because I really loved editing, kind of piecing the story together and making a new story out of a bunch of disparate stuff. Which is kind of what I'm doing now with the audio drama in a very real way. But and I worked in the business for a while on location and TV commercials, and worked with Robert Altman and a couple of big names, and then I also, started working with low budget stuff like Troma, and I did I worked on set with them a few times, which is, I got to say, not a pleasant experience. I think Lloyd will forgive me for saying that. Back then it was seat of the pants. But they eventually let me do some music for them. So I scored a couple of segments of the Toxic Avenger, the original Toxic Avenger, and did the entire score for another film released by them called Splatter University by a guy named Richard Haynes. And I went on just like the next 10 years was just film scores, basically, mostly horror. And then I decided, you know what? This is not really paying the rent. I'm going to, opened a studio, started getting into various other types of things. Like I found that, voiceover recording and audio books, which, or books on tape, whatever you call them, paid the bills better than any of that stuff. So I would just book all that. And then in my spare time, I would make music. So that's more or less been what it's been like ever since.
So did you ever, coming out of college, did you ever have like what my parents call a real job, or did you go into the Muggle world at all?
I think about that every now and then. I think, you know what? I look at people's Facebook posts or social media posts about their horrible job and how like they don't get respect, and I'm like, I wouldn't last a day. I would because I have no filter in those situations, and I suppose if I did it like that professionally for a while, I would realize, oh yeah, I'm just going to keep getting fired if I don't stop doing this. But like, I haven't really had like a 9 to 5. I mean, film production work was the closest thing I had to that. And that's never really 9 to 5. Sometimes it's, 6 to 4, whatever, 6 to 4 a.m. But sometimes there's no work at all, so, and you're not really that beholden to any one company. So it's not really the same thing as having like a steady 9 to 5 job with all that lovely job security. I am a teacher now, so I suppose you could say that's, but I really think of the students as my boss. I don't think of the university as my boss. So yeah, I don't know. I guess that is true. But I only do that a couple days a week. So.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you teach, or what have you taught?
Almost entirely sound related stuff. I did teach Unity for one semester, and they discontinued they wanted to try out a game design program, and I didn't have much experience with Unity, but they said we need somebody to teach Unity. I said, okay, hand up. So I did that. That was cool, but other than that one semester, it's all been sound related. So Sound 1, which is just introduction to sound post for film, which is my love. I mean, it's the thing I really enjoy. Sound design, ADR, music editing, etc., foleying, and then I also teach multi-track music production. And at NYU, I teach one class in the spring called Music and Gaming. So it's the intersection between the two industries and artistic practices.
That makes me think, okay, I'm like a super people connector. I love like introducing people to each other. I should introduce you to Marco Camerata if you haven't met him. He is a former opera singer who turned to voiceover, and now he has like I think he has over 1 million followers on YouTube because he started a YouTube channel maybe just over a year ago that is specifically about video game music.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm sure some of my friends must know him. I did get into scoring games for a short time in the aughts, and I guess I just couldn't quite break it. I couldn't break in completely. I don't feel like I really have that. Like, what really works nowadays is people who really understand the history of game music and understand like the genre of game music. So it's weird because I was a chip musician, right? I used a Game Boy to make music for a while as a performer, but none of my music, it all sounded like rock or hip hop or something. It didn't sound like game music, So the other people whose work immediately sounded like that got the work, and that's the way it should be probably. But yeah, it sounds great. I'd love to connect with him.
Yeah, I'll introduce you. It's interesting. I just read and without going too, or I can tangent forever. I'm sorry. I read an interview from like a couple years ago in Entertainment Weekly with it was Danny Elfman and my brain just stopped. 9 Inch Nails.
Trent Reznor.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is just going to be a recurring thing where I can't remember people's names. The two of them being interviewed at the same time and talking, bouncing about each other's music and how, I couldn't do what you do and you can't do what I do. And so that's interesting hearing you say like, oh, I have all these skills, but like I couldn't do what they do because it's just not your style, maybe, like that's not what you're.
Yeah, it's important to know your strengths. It's also important to experiment and try to break into things that you don't feel comfortable with, that you get outside your comfort zone and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, I think it's important to know your strengths and to really put up most of your effort where it's going to pay off, with something interesting that people will care about. But yeah, it's funny because Elfman just did that very 9 Inch Nails like record he just put out last year. Was it last year? But
I think he had put some out. I don't remember when, but it was recent. More or less.
So he may have had second thoughts about that, not able to do this.
Well, that might have been where that interview came from in the first place. But
okay. Yeah,
I'm not
maybe, I
sure.
don't know. Trent Reznor might have worked with him on that. I don't know.
Mm.
It was funny because both of those guys have had successful bands, and now they're both doing well. Elfman's been doing film scores for years, and
Yeah.
Reznor, so, he has not quite as long, but like that's kind of become like his main gig these days.
Yeah.
Right.
It's
So
where old rockers go to die, or no? It's where they go to continue working.
it's where they
Sorry,
go to get lots of awards, man.
that's true. Yeah, and actually, you can make a lot of money from if you've got your music on a film soundtrack release, especially, you can do pretty well. So
Residuals.
yeah,
Yeah, that's funny because that's always like what I like before I got into making video and audio stuff. Like that's what I wanted to do, was like be a musician and go out there and like play in a band and eventually get good enough where I could go like do scores and stuff for music. Yeah, back then I guess Elfman was probably the only guy I'd ever heard of that did that. But now with Reznor, it's like, oh well, if I'd actually gotten good and hadn't like ruined my ears, at the age of 20, I might have actually been able to pull that off. At least I like
yeah.
to think I could have.
Yeah, it's endlessly fascinating. No, totally, man. It's endlessly fascinating to look at these people and then look at the beginnings of their career, like how they got into what they're doing. I recently saw, I think it was the Gong Show episode with Danny Elfman, and
What?
he had a different band. It was called something else. It was the precursor to Oingo
Oingo Boingo.
Boingo, but it felt like Oingo Boingo at the circus. Like it was that element of Oingo Boingo, but times 1,000. Like almost like Spike Jonze. Not the film director, but the composer from the 40s. Wow, you got to look him up, man.
Okay.
Unbelievable. He absolutely was a huge inspiration for Elfman. Definitely. It's like all this physical comedy and music at the same time. Like he'll do like Holiday for Strings, it's like a common melody from back then.
Yeah.
And he'd do it on like tin cans, and like,
Yeah.
then it would cut like in the next verse would be like a guy with a tuba and the two guys with bulb horns, and then somebody like, screaming, and like it's totally insane. There's great videos on YouTube of his work. He was an absolute genius.
I'll definitely
Spike
look that
Jonze
up.
and the City Slickers.
Nice.
It's spelled with Jones with an E on the end. I think Spike Jonze, the director, has no E, right? To differentiate himself, or is it the
Well,
other way
no,
around?
like Spike Jonze, the director has it with a Z at the end of his name.
Right, Z, but is there an E after the Z?
I'd have to look it up. It's been
I
so
think
long
it's just a
since I've seen his
Z.
name.
So Spike Jonze, the composer, is Z, but with an E after it. Anyway, obviously the director just took the name, right? But I could see why, because the guy is endlessly inspiring. It just, I don't know. It's like somewhere between the most amazing sports feat you've ever seen and a composition, Anyway, yeah, I could go on about Spike Jonze.
So oftentimes we'll ask people, with you, it seems like you've done art, your whole adult life. So, but oftentimes, even if you are doing art, you end up having to serve someone else's purpose. And so, was there any time, sorry, I'm trying to phrase this right. Was there any time when you were serving someone else's purpose? How did you find time to create for yourself? Did you create for yourself?
Yeah, that's been an ongoing struggle. Nowadays, it's like, I guess once pandemic hit, I found myself with all this time at home, right? I was doing classes still, but I was doing it on Zoom, which was its own nightmare, I got to tell you. But I got really good at compartmentalizing, spending one day on my teaching, and then 2 days on music, or trying to get work. That's the other thing, is when you're freelancing or have your own company and you don't have a lot of work, you've got to constantly be hustling. And as I've gotten older, I've allowed myself a little bit of slack in that area, because I used to be like, when I was working in film production, man, I was hitting this. I was on the street every day that I wasn't working, looking for work, like meeting people, dropping off resumes, and I don't know who that guy was or where he got all that energy, because man, I don't have anything like that now. But what energy I do have goes almost always directly into my music and audio, just audio projects.
Hmm.
Luckily, I'm teaching sound, so I can there's a decent overlap between them. Um, I love performing, but that's a whole nother thing. It takes up a decent amount of time for preparation and stuff. I do have one gig coming up in January with my band, which will be fun, at a music and gaming convention. But but yeah, it's hard. It's a balancing act, you know. Like, I guess I hear these things about left brain, right brain, and I do definitely have that issue sometimes where I've been spending too much time in my left brain, you know, like the work mode and like getting jobs and all that stuff. And when I try to switch to my right brain, I'm like, the creative part doesn't come as easily. It takes like a couple hours for me to get back into it. So, but it's really the only way. I mean, you gotta kind of balance. And I guess the most important thing is that your bank account is always fluctuating. I mean, you just have to accept that,
Yeah.
you know. I mean, unless you really want to push hard for something that's going to pay you a lot of money, and I tried that a few times and I've been close to it. And I did have, I mean, obviously I had my own studio for a long time and I was making good money then. But that was just because I had a physical space, and it was in Manhattan. People would just
Hmm.
literally, oh, he's 4 blocks from us. Let's go record our voiceover. It was amazing. I got so much walk-in traffic. It was just amazing. Um, but once I got basically bought out of that, or basically priced out of that, I should say, and had to move back home in Brooklyn. And I was doing everything at home. And occasionally I would go and rent time at somebody else's studio if I needed to do something in a proper studio. But yeah, it's just been a balancing act all through my entire life.
So you mentioned
My kids have suffered most.
that.
Sorry, my
No.
kids have suffered the most. I'm sorry, Max and Zoe.
Have you ever struggled though with it sounds like to me like you haven't really had trouble motivating. I hear a lot of actors, a lot of artists really seem to have trouble motivating themselves, and I wonder if it's mostly because I'm around actors and they're dependent in, they shouldn't have to be dependent on somebody else to create stuff because now we have phones and things we can do stuff, right? But if you aren't used to going into the creator mindset of like being a writer producer, then that's harder. And so I'm just wondering, have you ever had trouble motivating yourself to create your own work when you weren't being paid by somebody else, or is that something that just kind of bubbles up and needs to come out?
I think I'm like an older guy at this point, so I think I've managed to settle into a pretty healthy relationship with my art. Um, and I'm able to turn on pretty quickly now. Like if I need to write music, I just need to listen to what I did yesterday
Mm.
for a minute and like, oh, now I hear this. I'm going to add this bass line. I'm going to, or whatever. However, that's if that would be true if all of my creative endeavors were one thing, like one, music or writing, or but they're not. So when I have to switch to writing mode, that's the hardest shift
Mm.
because it's a totally different part of your brain. I guess I don't know what it is, man. It's a completely different process for me, and I'm far less conversant in that process than I am in music. Um, so it's really it takes me like a couple of months sometimes to really write like a little bit every day and be like, I mean, I've definitely learned drafting, different techniques that help me, like writing an outline, just coming up with ideas and writing a big, literally a simple text document of ideas, or a Google Doc or something of ideas, and then going through them and deleting and moving things around and then saying, this is this character, this is that character. Um, but it's hard. Yeah, the writing thing is hard. It's harder than writing music, I think, at least for me.
Well, that's the thing. Like the music thing is like it's more of an immediate thing. So even if you're not sticking the landing right away, you can still have fun just kind of noodling around. It's a very just as an activity. I mean, that's always been my issue with writing. Is even though I've at this point I'm primarily way more of a writer than a musician. Like you give me enough takes on GarageBand, I can sound like I know what I'm doing. But
Your stuff is
it's
great, man.
oh well, thank you. Yeah, but I mean, yeah, like it's definitely that I think that like I feel like that's probably why a lot of writers, and I would say actors too, because there's always this delay. Like even for like actors, if you're doing a play, there's all this like rehearsal time before you can kind of like show people like, hey, here's
Yeah.
my thing, here's what I've done. Whereas music, it's almost like, yeah, even if you're just playing for
Mm.
yourself, you're still getting like, hey, I'm doing music, I'm playing, you know, you're hearing stuff. I feel like that's for other creative, like if you're someone who's like on the writer, director, or actor track, because of that delay, I feel like and Billy, you can, I mean, maybe you can maybe speak to this more than I can with a lot of the other actors, you know, like, do you feel like and then that's the kind of like, that's kind of like that hump you have to get over? And now that you're into the writing, Chris, do you find that is it harder now that you've got your own thing with Mandible Judy to do the writing part versus doing the music part? Because music is also a big part of your thing.
Series. Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's definitely harder, and yeah, the instant feedback thing that you get from music that you don't really get from writing, you can get it from acting, I suppose, because you hear yourself speaking. You can speak and you say that sounded great. Hey, I can do this, you know. And a little bit with writing, like, but you have to kind of go back and reread it, and I know what you mean. Like you just have to have faith in the project when you're a writer, you know. To some degree when you're an actor as well, you just have to know that when you finish it, it's going to be a cool project and it's going to be something you can be proud of if you work hard at it. With music, it's a bit easier because nowadays, man, with plugins and like, you know, processing and stuff, I can make it sound like a fully produced dance track right out of the gate. Like all I have to do is get a beat, you know, and a decent bass line, and just put some compressors on it, and a maximizer, and, you know, broaden out the stereo field a bit to make it feel bigger. And it's like, okay, I it's like almost like you get instant shots in the arm of adrenaline as you're working with music. Uh you have to kind of build it into your process again, you know, but I've kind of learned to do that. Just, you know, get everything at the right level, make it sound really tight, and then say, okay, what else does this need, you know, and just kind of continually add and iterate and change, and, you know. But yeah, it's harder with words because it's not as immediately, you can't hear the final podcast with the music and sound design and, you know, effects and everything and voiceover acting when you're writing it, or even when you're recording the voiceover for that matter. You know, it's just you have to have trust in the process, and you have to have faith.
That's interesting because
So
I
with the
sometimes I wonder if people who create podcasts like that, because I haven't created anything like that, but I have written a couple short
yet,
screenplays, and well, yeah, but I mean, I don't know if I will. But I have created a couple short screenplays, and so I wonder if you get to the point where, like in my screenplay writing, it's like as I'm writing it, I see it. Like I really
Oh,
see it.
she froze.
Did
yeah,
I?
with
I froze
internet
again?
problems.
What is going
Yeah,
on? Can you see me now?
there you are. Yeah,
Okay.
hi.
Um, I was saying, like, I wonder if you get to a point where it kind of just is in you, where you're seeing and hearing it as it's coming out of you, because I see it and then I write it. I can hear it and see it happening, you know?
Yeah. You mean, I think that's kind of part of developing your own voice. Is that what you're talking about? Kind of having a voice that you recognize yourself and you can encourage it?
I don't know, because I don't even know if that I mean, I haven't written enough to feel like I have my own voice yet, but I
Mm.
definitely think cinematically enough that I'm like, oh, this pans this way. She walks across the room. She goes to the kitchen. She takes out this. The cat, bats the clown nose out. Like that. There's things that happen in my brain and I see the close-ups and I see the this. So
Right.
that's happening in my brain. The story's there, and it's there in a very specific way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, the brain, pattern recognition and all that stuff. And just like, I think the brain just makes maps just generally when you're thinking about something. Like somebody's telling you a story, you're imagining where it's happening in your head.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard not to do that, I think. But as a writer, it really helps, I think, to be able to see it. And, I don't know, there's something about that physical aspect of the story that really helps it generate itself, I guess. Yeah, I agree, definitely. That's a good way to look at it, the cinematic aspect of it.
So backing up and piggybacking on all of this, like, tell us how Mandible Judy came about, because at this point you've got at least 3 seasons of Mandible Judy, 2 have done Dead Water, and you've got a spinoff called Becalmed, and you're working on season 3 of Under Dead Water. So by now you've got a pretty well fleshed out vision of this world that you've created. Tell us how did that get started and how has it evolved as you've come along with it?
Yeah, humble roots for sure. So let me know if you hear sirens behind me. They've just been coming and going all day. I don't know what's going on out there, but
it's New York, man.
Yeah.
Like, what are you going to do? Like, that's just the local
What are you gonna
local
do?
flavor.
Just lean out and tell them to shut up. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly. That'll help.
Hey, I'm talking here.
I'll get like tomatoes thrown at me. Yeah. So Mandible Judy. I had been a film composer, mostly, as I said, horror films. I got kind of off into my own audio production career for a long time, through the early 90s until really picked up in the late 90s, and then throughout the aughts. Somewhere around 20, I don't know. I guess it was after I moved out here to Kensington, Brooklyn. Around 2014 or so, I kind of started thinking, well, I really would like to get back into film scores if I can, and you know, I started teaching, so I was thinking like I'll just score some of my students, like the graduate students' films. There's some really good ones, and like maybe that'll. So I started doing that a little bit, and that's cool. It's really fun to do, but like I really wanted to push that side of my creative process and my potential income stream, right? And I also, because I had a lot of friends from the film business, from having gone to film school, having worked in film for a while, I figured I could kind of leverage that a little bit. It kind of didn't really work that way. It started to, but it was a long, slow road of because there are a lot of newcomers and younger people who are really, really good at what they do. And it wasn't like, it wasn't for lack of trying. It was just that, I think that it was just a swamped market at that point. There were lots of home production studios where you can make really beautiful sounding, fully orchestrated music in your bedroom, so that made it a little bit more competitive, quite a bit more competitive. So what I thought was, okay, if I don't have any, I thought I've got to get my music in a film that people can see, because they react to music a wholly different way when they see it in a film, in a context with visual media, right? So I thought, okay, well, what's the next best thing? If I don't have the budget to make a film of my own, right? So how about like doing a record release for my electronic horror style stuff, in which I kind of build these tiny little vignettes into the beginning of every song that are just these ideas. And it's just like a half a scene. It's usually just narration, or it's one actor, one character talking. So that was the release called Mandible Judy, because the first track, actually, no, sorry, there was one called Toonbox first. And that was with a bunch of my students. I got them to voice act for me, and we had a lot of fun. It mixed results. It's pretty good. But then the next time out, I decided, okay, I'm going to shorten the clips. They're too long. People aren't listening through the whole voiceover part and getting to the music. So I did these things, really short clips. And what I came up with, the first one was what is now the beginning of every Mandible Judy episode, which is this narrator just telling the story of who Mandible Judy is and what happened to her, and it's like less than a minute long, and then the music kicks in, right? So I basically did that and put that as a release on Bandcamp, and got booked for some shows and had a lot of fun with it. Started doing. I also, around the same time, I was asked to do Splatter University, the first horror film I ever scored, in 1981. Yes, I know. I was young, but also it was a long time ago. and I was asked to do that live with a screening. So I performed the music live. So it took me months to prepare that, but it was totally a labor of love. I love doing it. I did it at a couple of festivals. I did it at a couple of movie theaters. Actually, I did one of them. It's in Savannah, Georgia, at the Fright Fest, run by a guy named Ryan Graveface. That's what he goes by. And he's got like a record store, and like he's got a museum now, like a horror museum in Savannah. Guy's just like amazing. He's a powerhouse. So anyway, I started thinking, well, this is kind of an interesting story, this Mandible Judy thing. I wonder what would happen if I tried to flesh it out into an actual story. Not really thinking of myself as a writer at the time, just thinking, well, I came up with a cool idea. Let's see where I can take it. And so I started to write, flesh it out a bit. And it, slowly became an idea for a film or a TV series or a podcast or something. And since audio drama was the cheapest to produce, that's where I went. And I just kind of built it up from there, and was lucky to meet a bunch of amazing voice artists right away. Social media is really good for that. So I met a bunch of people really quickly, and they all recommended other people. So that's been really good. And I think without the cast, I think that this would not be nearly as good a show. It's just really, it's brought up to a level that's above, I think, its humble roots by the cast. The cast really, really makes it into something living and interesting. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that does help. I mean, yeah, it's definitely, we talked about that gratification. It's something when you actually start to hear your words be read by actors that know what they're doing. That's that dopamine hit, you find like, oh, it's real now. I know that similar when we did Garfield's Crossing, like, just getting to do the auditions, and actually hearing those people, kind of read stuff for the first time, and now you're actually getting to hear your characters speaking.
Yeah.
Like there's I feel like, that's kind of the moment for like writers and directors where it's like, you like, just like when you strum the guitar or hit the keyboard, like now, like there's the shot, that where you actually start to feel it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, every actor that I worked with had some feedback that they gave me that started those gears rolling, my favorite example is probably Matthew Bird, who plays Jerry Rivers in Under Dead Water. Matt is he's got like a really special voice. He's got a really deep, resonant, gravelly voice, right? And he can push it harder if you want him to. And so I said, you're kind of like a shock jock radio host. You're kind of a little annoying, like you're way too over the top, and we did the first couple episodes voiceover for his character. And I was like, I don't know, something about this guy just reminds me of pro wrestling. I wasn't sure what it was, just the graveliness and kind of like, the way he talks like that, and so it's like
Jerry Rivers.
Yeah. So I kind of wrote it into the next episode where he's talking about his past as a pro wrestler. And Matt read that and he called me and he's like, I can't believe that you just did that, because I worked in pro wrestling. That's why I sound like that. I was an announcer, like a local events announcer for pro wrestling. And I was like, oh my God, that's just too perfect. Like he hinted at it with his voice. As a writer, I kind of picked up on it, and it's just gone. Like it became basically Roddy Rowdy Piper in The Thing, right? John Carpenter's The Thing. It became like that character more or less, right? Which was really fun for me because I love that movie. Not The Thing. I'm sorry. They Live. They Live. Right. The Thing is my favorite Carpenter movie, but They Live is my second favorite. But yeah, so it's really fun the way that works. With Graham Rowett, it was like, I think we bonded. I think I might have mentioned John Huston to him. Like, I want this guy. He's like a rich dude, head of a pharmaceutical company, proper upbringing, kind of a prick, and I said, like John Huston, maybe like that kind of, gravitas. And Graham was like, oh, that's great, man. And we started talking about it, and we came up with John Huston in, God, what's it called? It's
Chinatown.
Yeah, Chinatown. Thank you. So John Huston character in Chinatown, he has this tendency to talk on long-winded oratory, and like he just loves to hear himself talk, right? Like that's what you get from the character. And his turns of phrase are really from like another century. Like they're really, so
And this is
odd.
like, for people who don't know, this is the like, he's kind of like one of the main villains in Mandible Judy.
Yeah, right. Magnus Becker is the character's name. So that really, and then I realized, well, this is cool, but man, Graham has a lot of untapped potential here. He could take this so much further, but the character just isn't interesting enough. Like I could have written it better, I'm sure, but it was also a matter of the plot was kind of moving away from his character a little bit. So I didn't really have the opportunity to write as much for him. So when we made Under Dead Water, which is essentially a spin-off series, happens in a different state, but similar circumstances, I had him play a sea captain in the 1800s, a 19th century sea captain, a whaling ship. And man, he so takes to that. He's got this paranoia about the ice forming around him, freezing him into into immobility. And we just worked on that and just like made him this really neurotic sea captain. And that was one of the most fun characters that I've ever written, I think. And then with you, Brandon, like I think we had moments like you start doing like an English accent for Marbury. And like I hadn't really, Marbury kind of sounds like an English name, but I hadn't really thought about it. And you started doing that and you started just embodying this dude, who sounded like well-meaning ship hand, but also kind of capable of, kicking ass when he needs to. And
I came up with like a whole backstory for this guy. And
that's amazing.
It helped because, I looked up the name Marbury because I was, I wanted to see like, okay, so where does this name come from? And they're like, well, it's an English name. And then I think at the time I was, my wife had gotten me into Downton Abbey.
Oh yes. Oh yeah.
And like I was deep, and I was like 4 or 5 seasons in, and I just thought like, I had this idea like what, and I think because like trying to get the English accent down, I think I was going after the head butler, who's
the Irish guy.
No. I don't think he's not Irish. The head,
guy.
The head maid.
Butler.
I think she's Scottish, but he's like super British,
right?
And I know I came in there, and you're like, that's too posh, and then we kind of like went from Downton Abbey down to like Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah.
But I also kind of like came up with this idea that like, okay, what if he had been like this rich guy from like, and I based it kind of like Southwest England, because that's like, and they maybe moved to London at one point, and then like things in his life went
Welsh or something,
or like Cornwall, Devon, but Devon, Cornwall, that area, because also like if you listen to like the lead singer Chris Martin from was it Coldplay?
Right.
He's from around Devon, which actually I looked, through doing research, I realized that's where my family is from, and back hundreds of years ago in England.
Awesome. Wow.
And I also knew a guy at work who like when I was working at Turner Broadcasting at the time, one of the engineers that I was always around was from Devon. So I always had his voice to listen to as well. And it's one of those like, it sounds like an American who just really overpronounces their words. So it's like, this is an accent I can probably comp fairly easy. And like, I'm not going to try to go out there and do like a Cockney accent or, go so one of those more that's like a little more extreme. Like this is one I can probably pull off and make believable.
Yeah.
And so like, it was like, okay. And then plus also we figured like this guy's probably been at sea half his life. So his accent's like watered down.
Yep.
And he's been around like Irish and Scottish and Americans and
Haitians and
Jamaican.
What's that?
Like being in the United States military, like there's the military accent, right?
Yep. Yeah, that's right. That's what they say. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And you brought a lot. And like that definitely fed into how, I was seeing the character in the context of the story, what I had him do. He definitely becomes one of the good guys. But the whole thing with the song, you sang us like I had an Irish friend of mine write some fiddle music, and because he's like an Irish fiddler, right? So he did that and recorded it for me. And then he found these old folk songs that, would have been currently popular in the 1860s. And he sang one of them. And then he also gave me the music alone, and then Brandon did his own version, like where he's singing it to himself, like up at the top of the mast, like trying to keep himself company. And that was awesome, man. I really enjoyed that. That just was such a good character detail.
And then that was me looking up. Apparently, there's like literally like 100 versions of this one song called.
Oh,
like
that's right.
The
You
two
found it, didn't you?
The Two Sisters.
Yeah.
I think you kind of tipped me off to it, but like, yeah, you're talking. It's funny because
I forgot
you were
that.
talking about pushing yourself earlier, whereas like Mandible Judy takes place in the 1980s, which I mean, you've got a lot of experience making that kind of music. What was the thing that says was the music what kind of pushed you to kind of make that switch to the 1860s, or just that was where the story was kind of going in your mind, and you says, and now I have to push yourself as a musician, or kind of maybe get outside of your comfort zone, because that's what's part of what's cool about when you get into Under Dead Water is like those shifts in the music, and the music is always kind of what drives it. There's always those cues to let you know, okay, now we're in the 80s, now we're in the 1860s.
Yeah.
And it's really cool how each one feeds the other.
Yes. So where the 1860s thing came from, it wasn't the music, but I mean, as soon as I thought of this, I immediately thought, oh man, I can do so much cool shit with music for this. Right. And I didn't think of it right away, but like eventually, hurdy-gurdy, became, I can't remember whether that was also between you and Clayton and I. We were like bouncing ideas around about the music from that time. And I don't remember which one of us said hurdy-gurdy, but we all started like geeking out on these hurdy-gurdy videos on YouTube. And I worked that in. I found a really, really good sounding sample set for the hurdy-gurdy music. It's incredibly limited instrument, so it's really hard to write on, but it was super fun. But what started my fascination with that period was, God, it must have been in the 90s. I read an article about the Franklin expedition to through the Arctic. It was trying to find I guess the Northwest Passage. I'm not sure what they called it, but basically going up into the Arctic from England, right, and trying to come back down across the other side of America, right, and or maybe it was just going around Greenland. I can't remember now, but anyway, basically he got stuck in the ice, right? And they were all like, they'd found the expedition, I think in the 1990s. I'm pretty sure they found like the wreck, right? And and there was all this conjecture based on the scientists' study of the bones and the where they were, how far they were from the ship, and all that stuff. And the story that emerged right away was really bizarre. It was like, for some reason, he had decided, I'm going to get up front, I'm going to tell you, this story ended up not being true. Like, it was misconstrued from the facts, and later they figured out what actually happened. But the one I read in the 90s, which has really got my imagination running, was that this guy they'd all gone crazy. They'd all been basically stir crazy on the ship. There's just ice all around them. There's nothing to hunt. There's no food. They have to leave the ship across the ice to go try to find something that they can kill and eat, right? Or plants or whatever, which is good luck in the Arctic, right? So they decide to abandon the ship in the ice, walk across the ice, but for some reason he decides, well, we've got to bring all this royal furniture that we were shipping to, like they brought a bunch of royal furniture with them for some reason or other. Like they're bringing it from one place to another for the king and queen. I don't know. I can't remember who would have been a queen at that point, I think. Or no, actually it would have been King George, probably. So they decide they're going to lug all this furniture across the ice. Like, it wasn't hard enough, right? So this, of course, kills multitudes of their crew, like just trying to get this furniture across the ice. And like they keep finding these, a King George dresser and a bunch of dead bodies, stuff like that, right? So that I just found that, like, just basically going crazy because of ice, that was what really made me develop the whole 1860s part of the plot. Just the crazy stuff that can happen when you're stuck out at sea. So in our story, it wasn't ice, it was that they were becalmed because the wind died, right? And what eventually becomes clear is that the wind died because these creatures from another galaxy basically changed the forces of nature to better suit them, because they couldn't deal with the wind, right? So they basically calmed the wind. And what they didn't realize was that it stuck this ship out in the middle of the ocean. And it couldn't get anywhere, and they were quickly starving and going nuts. So the captain's the first one to go nuts, and I had him basically, written after Captain Frederick, or Admiral Frederick. Franklin, Admiral Franklin, Captain Sir John Franklin. Thank you. Okay. So
briefly promoted and then demoted.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Exactly. Anyway, it was a cool story, and it's inspiration comes from anywhere, right? Like, just, hey, that's cool. I want to write something like that. And it turned out to be not true. While I was researching it for the podcast, I found out that it was completely untrue, and that, basically there was furniture there, but I think they had brought it as firewood or something like that. And I don't know. I can't remember. It wasn't as pervasive. The furniture thing was not as important part of the story as it seemed in the beginning. And they actually got a lot further than they had originally thought. Like, eventually the ship thawed. They went back to it. They got further down, anyway. So it's an interesting expedition. And yeah, that's all you need for a story, man. Something weird like that you can just imagine the craziest stuff,
It reminds me of an interview I saw with Sammy Hagar years and years ago, where he was talking about like some of his best lyrics came from like listening to songs and then imagining or like hearing the lyrics wrong.
Yeah, nice.
And he's like, "Oh, well, I'll just use what I thought they said."
That
That's
comes
hilarious.
back to like the whole idea of not letting the truth get in the way of a good story, right? Like,
yep.
And yesterday, speaking of songs, there was a song that my boyfriend was talking about that he had misheard the lyrics. Well, he didn't know he misheard the lyrics. He was like, "Yeah, there's a song called, was it Big Balls and something?" And I was, or no, he thought it said Lick Balls in something, and I was like,
"Oh my god,
what?" It's a George Strait song, and it is Big Balls in something. And he's like, "Wow, I think I imagined all of." Okay, it's not Lick Balls. It's
right.
But I was like, even if it's Big Balls in Cowtown, that's what it is. It's Big Balls in Cowtown.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's a song.
Yeah, I had a former coworker the other day send me a country song that was actually, I figured out very quickly the song is making some very specific references to gay sex. And I was just like, oh, well, I think like this dude likes to just shock. He's like a kind of a quiet, unassuming guy, but he likes to shock people.
Who is that?
This guy, a guy I used to work with that he'll like, well, because he's like a big music lover, and like we would be sending each other like stuff occasionally on Facebook, and he found this thing and he sent it to me, and I was just like, oh my goodness. So that's not my thing, but you enjoy yourself, buddy. But it was just like this country song that starts off sounds very nice and normal, then you go, wait a minute, this thing is going up a very specific alley.
Yeah, well, I was raised on 80s post-punk, which is full of that stuff. So like it never phased me. I don't know. Like my favorite band from the Time magazine, it took me a while to realize that, yeah, these really hard rocking dudes are like everybody in the band was gay, and they were writing about what they knew, and it was
which band?
Hey, magazine. They're not very well known now. They kind of splintered. There are other bands that kind of came out of that whole era. They're from Manchester. That were much more famous. But the guitar player is hands down my favorite guitar player of all time, John McGeoch. He was a Scottish guy. But anyway, their songs they're the most colorful metaphors for gay sex I've ever heard. They're really fun. Like the Kennedy assassination envisioned as a gay sex, I don't know how to explain it, but basically it's all part of this gay relationship he was in.
Back and to the left. No.
Yeah, it was really interesting. So yeah, and then the Smiths. I mean, the Smiths are God. Some of their Hand in Glove. I mean, some of their songs are really, overt. He's unfortunately turned out to be a complete dick, but
Morrissey.
Yeah.
But speaking of the Smiths and that, I came up with this fun game that I want to play with people eventually, which is called "Is This a Smith Song or a Giallo Movie?" Because the titles are so similar in some ways. And so I
That's excellent.
Yeah. In fact, if you want to play, I can pull them up.
Oh yeah, hell, let's do it. I know the Smiths catalog really well, so I don't think I'll lose.
Oh no,
But
yeah, I was gonna say with somebody else you might, this might, but Chris is probably going to nail this one.
unless it's all Morrissey tracks, like from his solo stuff, I wouldn't get those probably, but I definitely would get the Smith studio records.
Well, like for
Anyway,
instance, let's just throw out
yeah,
one or
yeah,
two.
please, yeah, I'm interested to hear.
Okay. Mozart is a murderer. Smith song or Giallo film?
Now you wait. So when you say Smith song, do you mean is there a song titled that, or is that lyric from a
It's
song?
no. It's either a Morrissey or Smith song or a Giallo
Okay,
film.
okay,
Title.
yeah,
Yes, title.
it's probably a Morrissey song. It's not
No,
a
that
Smith
is a
song.
Giallo film.
Okay, all right, but it could be. It could totally be. Yeah.
The teachers are afraid of the pupils.
I'm going to say the Smiths.
Yes, that is a Smith
Is it?
/ Morrissey. Yep.
Okay.
Don't torture a duckling.
That's definitely Giallo because that was made by Lucio Fulci, who I worked with, so I know his pretty well.
The harsh truth of the camera eye.
Ooh.
Wow, that sounds like a Giallo film title. It's like
Doesn't
way
it?
too long. It's really weird. So it's not.
No.
I'm going to go with Smith just because I feel like it seems like it's like it's a false tip
Yeah.
in the other direction.
Your vice is a locked room and only I have the key.
That sounds totally like a Morrissey solo thing.
Yeah.
No, that is a Giallo film. Thank you for playing.
That's great. Those are really well chosen. You're absolutely right. I never thought of that.
They
Wow.
sound so similar. Yeah. I am not as familiar with the Smiths catalog and Morrissey catalog as I am with Giallo, so.
So I know
Giallo's
I've
amazing.
mentioned this to Chris before, but Billy, have you seen the Simpsons take off on more? I think they called him Quimby, and it was Benedict Cumberbatch doing his version of Morrissey.
No, I have not.
It is amazing. Like he does a song like "Everyone is Perfectly Awful."
I need to find that.
It's such a perfect spoof, and it's him hanging out with Lisa, of course, because she's the musician, and he's doing his whole. He's like talking like, and I sit in the bathtub and hope I will drown. It's like, just like that, like super mopey.
I always thought Morrissey was at his best when he was making fun of himself. Like in the early Smiths records, actually all pretty much through the Smiths career, his songs, they sound like he's bragging, but he's actually just completely pillaring his own person. Like, Stop Me If You've Heard This One Before, like he basically, it's just him making excuses to his lover why he couldn't make it, to meet them. And like, what is it? Nothing's changed. I still love you. I still love you, only slightly less than I used to. But he's basically, I'm the dick. Sorry,
Back when he still had some self-awareness about it.
Exactly.
Or at least gave a damn.
Yeah. Yeah, or Big Mouth Strikes Again, like songs like that, where he's just basically, I'm an idiot, just don't even listen to me, those are really good songs. It was also peak Johnny Marr guitar playing and band. They were so tight.
Self-deprecation can lead to some really great art sometimes, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The Sparks are like that too. Like if you watch the Sparks documentary and the lead guy from the Sparks, the one who looks like Salvador Dali, I can't remember his name. Ron? Is it Ron?
Ron, yeah.
Yeah. He is so self-deprecating all the time.
Yeah. Totally deadpan too. He's great.
Mm-hmm.
He's so they're fantastic. That's definitely my era.
I know we're coming up close to the end of our time, and I have another meeting and to go to, so we were going to keep this close to an hour today. But I wanted to ask one other question, which is kind of with the the work. Obviously, with you're not like a full-time day job person. You're not trying to do this stuff on the side. You kind of just made art your life, which is amazing. Like that's what I always wanted to, is just to do everything I wanted to do and write and act and whatever, right? So I was curious though, you were talking about pounding the pavement and sending out resumes or trying to get work. have you found that more left-brained way to be more productive in getting work, or has creating your own work, how has creating your own work brought people to you?
Yeah, you know that you would think, and sometimes it's true that creating your own work will like you if you really do something you're proud of, you have the best possible um portfolio you could have, right? That could come from you. And that's very true. Unfortunately, not everybody's work is as saleable and is immediately viral, will immediately go as viral as other people's work. And I, having grown up in the 60s and 70s and 80s, my way of thinking, I mean, basically to me, Star Wars is the beginning of the end for American cinema. Like that, basically, that's where American cinema turned the wrong way, because everything before that, for the previous decade or two, is amazing. Like we had so many incredible films in this country. And in Star Wars, not that it's a bad film, it's really cool for what it is, but it was so shiny and attractive to people that before you knew it, that's all you could get. It squeezed out so much other cinema. And for a little while, we had this paltry thing in the 90s called indie cinema, which I love and it's wonderful. And I wouldn't denigrate any of those people, right? Like, I don't know. I can't remember I mean, actually, I know a lot of them, so I should denigrate them. They're awesome people, and they did great work. And some of them moved on, but what happened to their careers? Like Ang Lee, right? Great indie director, right? Goes Marvel. Like they all go Marvel or Disney at some point.
Ang
And
Lee
as soon
only
as
did like what he did. He did the Hulk briefly, but I feel like he quickly kind of got back to
he
being
did,
Ang Lee.
he did, and then I feel like Everything Everywhere All at Once by the Daniels is kind of like the Neo Ang Lee movie in a way. It's got, I mean, not just because it's Asian culture, but I don't know, it just has that vibe. Like it's really complex story, but it's also like they did something that was really interesting where they really kind of it was a balancing act, like a crazy balancing act where it
Well,
had both.
what's crazy about that movie is one of those, like I've talked about this with other people. Like it's one of those, like if you describe that movie to someone, like it shouldn't work.
Right.
Like like you listen and you just go, what are you trying to
Yeah.
what are
Yeah.
you trying to do here? And the fact
It,
that you even pull that off, like if you pull that off, you've got gold, just because it's one of those things.
yeah.
It just sounds so insane. Like you said, balancing all the family drama, the sci-fi, the
Right.
different, all the different setups, and then
Right.
some just really absurd comedy in there as well.
Right. But
Like,
like, I mean, I think the problem with that, and like, if I thought naturally like that, if that was the way my brain worked, I feel like, yeah, I could make my own work and it would draw people to me and hire me for things. But and I can recognize that as great work. It's my favorite film in the last 5 years, probably, right? But I mean, William Friedkin just died. Like his films are just like the holy grail to me. Like there are other directors like him. I mean, early Coppola films, Scorsese certainly. I know it was a very male centric, strangely very Italian American world, but it just had so much grit and so much story, and they knew how to tell stories. Like they really knew how to build a story up, and it wasn't just relying on flashiness and pyrotechnics and effects and CGI and or big names and like I just I'm so sick of Marvel. I can't even tell you. I am and I grew up on Marvel. Like they were, Marvel comic books are one thing. Marvel movies are a whole different thing. Like I don't feel like that ever should have happened.
well,
To me.
I like the Marvel movies, but I also think like with the success of like Oppenheimer and Barbie both coming out at the same time, like I'm wondering if there's, because like you look, because I mean, like, yeah, they both had like just an insane advertising budget
Yeah.
behind them, but like to see how good both of those movies have done, like I'm hoping that, I can't remember, some big director was like, oh, this is going to be like a new golden age of cinema. And I'm like, okay, like it's still a little
Settle
early,
down.
but I
Yeah,
hope
right.
you're right.
Right.
But I mean, I think I do think there's like, especially when you see some of like Marvel's latest offerings, I can't help but wonder if there's like a little bit of burnout there, because I mean,
Yeah.
they spent 10 years working on that Infinity Saga, which was impressive. The fact that you can make 20 movies tied in together and then kind of stick the landing with Endgame.
I just
just
thought it was totally forgettable. I watched every one of them, and I don't remember any of the plot, like none. I just felt like it was like Sorcerer, which was made in 1975, I think. I remember every single detail about that film. Marvel, it just goes in one eye and out the other. I don't know, goes into my brain and it just leaves immediately
It's
after.
a visual Chinese food.
Yeah. I mean, I understand like there's art and art, like they're great artists who make that film, and it's really impressive to watch. The acting sometimes can be pretty good, but the camera and the effects are doing all the acting. Let's face it. I mean, the actors, yeah, they're really good, but you're mostly recognizing who they are, what their name is, and
Mhm.
who their character is, and then they could pretty much sleepwalk through the rest of it if they wanted to. I don't think I've ever seen a really great performance in a Marvel film. There are a couple actors I like more than other actors, but it's not the same thing as, like, I don't know, God, Robert Duvall in The Godfather, or I don't know, any of those actors, Diane Keaton in The Godfather, or and I know I sound like an old guy, and I am, and that's the problem, is that the way my brain works is way too complex, and they're not really complex. Let's give patting myself on the back too much. It's more that I guess I get a rise out of things that are really deep, and like deep story wise, like where you can really sink your teeth into it and follow it down which is why I love audio drama, right? But what is successful in audio drama? Certainly not, the Mandible Judys of the world. I mean, we have success, thankfully, and I'm very, very, thankful for that. But I could never make a living from this. There's just no way. Nobody involved in this can make a living from it. To make a living from podcasting, you have to have a celebrity. You have to talk about bullshit. You have to talk about, like, your whatever, dating, or who said the wrong thing at the Grammys, or that's what sells, unfortunately. And it would be fine if that existed and the money filtered into all this other production, but of course that's not the way it works. They see one thing that works, they just keep recreating it, and that's the Marvel model as well. It's the Disney model. They just keep redoing the same thing over and over because it's a cash cow, and I kind of can't blame them. I mean, I guess if my purpose was to make money, that's what I would be doing too.
But on the
I
flip
don't.
side, I'm going to push back just because I do believe that, like, people who want good stuff, it's just the same. It's similar with, like, music. You see, like, people, because I remember, like, because being my age, and we're like, when hip hop started. I mean, hip hop had been around, like, since, like, the late '70s, but then, like, in the '90s or late '80s, early '90s, you get, like, MC Hammer and Vanilla Ice, who, like, blow up, and, like, and almost nobody's going to take those guys, like, seriously as, like, great rappers.
Right.
But I will say, on the flip side, it did lead people. Like, a lot of people suddenly start going back and then getting into, like, they start getting, then you see, like, that suddenly, like, Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Tupac, Biggie, then, like, like, hip hop explodes, like, in the early to mid '90s. And I do believe that there's something to be said for that. Like, yeah, it's pop, and you can say it's forgettable, or just like, okay, it's like it's junk food for the brain. But sometimes I feel like that can bring in people, like, same with, like, the Marvel movies, like, the people who, like, there are people who might, like, that might be, like, their gateway to get into filmmaking. But those same people, I always feel like they will go back and watch, like, the Scorsese stuff in the '70s, and, like, Coppola, and, like, yeah, like, if you're I mean, there's certain people that will always get lost. They'll get trapped there. I mean, just because it's always they get the like, the popcorn movies, like, they make a lot of money, and there's always going to be those people, because they're those people that want to go home and watch TV and not think about anything. They're going to watch the show where everything gets solved, like, in an hour or 30 minutes, and boom, case of the week, whatever. But then I do believe that there are other people, and I think this is just something speaking to personality, or just to get, like, I do think that some people there are those people who will get stuck, but there are those other people who's like, oh, that's cool, what else is out there? And then they go dive deeper. I think that's just in
But the
it.
problem is, Brandon, if I can interject, I think the
Certainly.
problem. I agree with your model. Basically, I think that's true. But the problem is, it's more complex than that, because we've been trained by decades of popcorn movies, for using your term. We've been trained to expect a certain level of instant gratification, of not having to think about it. And so people say, oh, I want to really think about that really cool, thoughtful movie. Their idea of that is not the same as it was in the late 70s, right?
Oh, absolutely.
In the late 70s, people had a way broader, attention span for these things. And they really wanted to see things that push the envelope. And I just think it's basically money ruins everything. I think that's basically what it is. That money, like capitalism and money, yes, it allows certain things to exist that wouldn't otherwise exist. But since it's trained us all on, look, I'll just say garbage. I mean, I know they're not all garbage, but there's an awful lot of garbage out there. I think that basically we expect more of that. And when we see something that's a little bit different, we say, that's cool. But we have no idea how to watch those films because we've been trained to watch films a different way, So
I'm hoping it's all like a fake. It's going to be like, like in the 80s when you had all, no, it's like,
yeah.
I'm hoping it's going to be like in the 80s where you had all the hair metal bands, but that eventually leads to grunge and then the rise of indie rock. There's always I'm hoping we're just in a phase now, and maybe it's starting to come to an end, and then we're hopefully we'll get like a new wave of more thoughtful, more kind of like stuff that's not all.
I wonder if we're still able.
Franchise.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry,
I wanted to say that I would also push back and say that I think that there is deep storytelling out there. There is. I have not, just full disclosure, I stopped watching Marvel movies like 10 years ago after my ex and I broke up because he used to drag me to every single one. And so the only ones I've seen very few, because I'm with you, like they are forgettable. I don't remember the story of them. I think I froze again. I don't remember the story of them after I see them. They're gone, right? And the movies that stick with me are different. But like Parasite, for instance. Parasite was powerful fucking storytelling, right? And most of the storytelling that is really deep and really again powerful and deep storytelling, a lot of it is on TV right now. Barry is amazing.
Very true.
So many shows are amazing right now, so many. And
TV is a whole different medium.
Right. But film wise, it's like they're out there. I feel like the problem is, like you said, money is there's not as many great, amazing films being greenlit, and if they are, they're not being seen is the problem. I think they're there. I just don't think they're getting seen as much as they used to.
Yeah, and I mean, I do think that. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Were you still talking?
No.
Oh, good. Okay, because your video is still looks like you're talking.
No.
Lag. Hello, lag. I agree. I think that both. I think that both of what you're saying is true, and also what I was saying is true. It's kind of a combination. I do think that we've been trained to think differently about media now. Thankfully, thank God for The Sopranos. That basically started a whole. I imagine, I don't know if you guys remember, you're probably too young to remember too much before that, but TV used to suck. It used to be awful. You occasionally get like a Seinfeld or something like that that's funny, but it's still just a sitcom, and it's and it just got so much better.
Except for, and my boyfriend and I are rewatching this right now, Twin Peaks. I'm a huge Twin Peaks fan.
Yeah, that was a labor of love, and it was really bizarre. And it crashes and burns in the second season, in my opinion. But the first season is really cool, and I love the Return. What was it called? Twin Peaks.
Oh, I haven't watched it yet. I watched.
It's really good. It's kind of like if you imagine letting David Lynch go and letting him do whatever the hell he wants. That's what the Pink Twin Peaks The Return is. Mm-hmm. Is it called The Return? I can't remember.
Yeah, I think so.
But the problem with that is, as we know, they got too greedy. The streamers, right? The streamers, and the way that the whole economic model basically took over, and they realized, oh man, we can have our cake and eat it too, and we can abuse our actors. We can, write these and our writers, and we can, if they don't want to do it, there's plenty of other fish in the sea, and just treating them like, and I think that we're right now at an era that's very much akin to what we used to call corporate rock before punk rock and hip hop and disco broke. Corporate rock was that era in the late 70s where all the cool things about deep listening and deep, writing and deep, concept in your records and all that, it went too far. It just became like ways to market the same thing over and over again. And people started getting sick of it. And so a revolution happened. We got hip hop and we got punk rock, and that changed everything. But I don't know if we're in that same place as a culture. Like, I don't know if we can ever get back to that again now. I think we've been too trained. We've been, I don't know, raised by on the teat of capitalist media. This, I don't know how else to put it.
I don't know. I'm an optimist. I think Brandon and I are in the same more mindset of optimistically thinking that it'll turn over again, because I remember when early 2000s came about and all of a sudden I was like, wow, all the music out right now is shit. Like, all this boy band bullshit, all this other, like, Santana, Rob Thomas, whatever, all that stuff, Mambo number 5. Like, I mean, all of that era, I was like, what is happening? Where did all my good music go? Like, where did all my indie rock and grunge and whatever go? And then all of a sudden, Arcade Fire came in, and, White Stripes and a bunch of other people. And I was like, oh, rock. Okay. Like,
there was
music
a
that is
resurgence,
interesting and different and has some soul to it and isn't just produced, right? So I think it
Well, I
always
think,
just
yeah,
goes
like
over.
art and music, they're always everything. It kind of comes in waves, and it sucks really bad when you're in the bad wave. But then, like, I'm hoping, I like this director who I can't remember, but like this, I'm hoping that something like with the Barbie and the Oppenheimer. I mean, like, also with this, hopefully when the streamers, when we can rest some of the get these greedy fuckers to cough up some money to the writers and the actors, and maybe like we can keep this resurgence going and actually get some more like thoughtful stuff out there. Because I do think, I mean, I'm just, because like someone who follows a lot of this geeky stuff like the Star Wars and the Marvel, there's definitely I've been noticing like a shift where there's for so long time, like everybody was all about it. And now you can almost feel the downward slope, because everybody's like, oh man, Marvel's like there. Cause like their last few movies have been like, I know, like I'm not talking, but like there's definitely been a drop off in quality, like a noticeable drop off, like where even like the most hardcore fans are going, guys, we need to talk. This is it's like, it's getting like, and it's been like all across the board, like on the TV shows and thing. And like Star Wars has been on shaky footing for a while. I think they'll probably do well with the next series coming out.
Andor was really good. I'll give them that.
Andor was because
that's my favorite Star Wars thing I've ever seen. Better than any of the movies, better than all of it, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, Andor. Well, I feel like it's one of those things. Like Andor's one to me. Like I loved it because it's the first one that spells out the political implications of what they've always been talking about, stuff that was in the background, and they bring it up to the forefront.
Right.
So, and it's why I kind of chafe at people. For like people who watched The Last Jedi and thought it was so deep. It's like, well, if you actually watch this stuff and you actually start think about what's going on, it was always there. It's just sometimes you need the people to, like, you need that thing that spells it out. But I feel like Andor dove in so deep and it felt so grounded that like they really elevated the material. But I also know people that like who hate it because of that. So
yeah, I know. Yeah, it's weird. Star Trek is also going through growing pains in that way. Like everybody's praising Brave New Worlds. I love Discovery. That was my favorite series of Star Trek of the entire, all the series combined. But well, the first 2 seasons anyway. The rest of it, not so much. But the new one, Strange New Worlds, I'm like, they're just listening to the fans too much. Like they're just going back and forth between like, full on musicals and like time travel. And like, I'm like, yeah, how about some consistency of story arc where it's like, like where the arc lasts a season instead of every episode there's a new arc. It's like, I don't know. Anyway, I have a pet peeve about episode arcs that really bothers me. If you're writing something like the Twilight Zone, like what they used to call anthology television or anthology stories, that totally makes sense. The story begins at the beginning of the episode, it ends at the end of the episode. The characters do not carry over. That makes sense. But with a series, the characters and obviously are carrying over, and the story should too. Not just the incidentals, but like in sorry, what's it called? Discovery, there was a 2-season arc, that at first 2 seasons, like it was a long game arc that they fed into, much like Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, The Sopranos, especially Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, I think. And the problem with that is it requires consistent attention. It requires not being distracted and wanting to go out and watch things blow up, in the movie theater. And luckily those guys they've gotten so good at that stuff now, the TV writers that and the actors as well, that they really come to a peak. And I think we'll see what happens now with this whole shakeout. I'm glad the strike came when it did, because I think the streaming services they were already shaking out. Like, some were going out of business, some were getting bought. And I think that it was already it was already sort of a death knell for the quality of the entertainment. They were starting to not green light all the cool stuff. Things would get started, like Raised by Wolves seemed really cool for that first season, and after the second season they just canceled it. I was like, okay, I didn't like the second season as much, but it certainly should have kept going, So I don't know. We'll see what happens. I think with the writers and the Screen Actors Guild strike, I hope that the studios and the streamers are forced to pay attention to quality and pay for it, and actually work with people to make their lives better so they can write better stories, or act in better stories, tell better stories. I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. Another thing, I just as a final note, the other thing that gives me hope is that so many of the really great stuff that's coming out right now, like Parasite, like Triangle of Sadness, like White Lotus, a lot of it
Yeah.
has an extremely anti-capitalist bent.
Yeah.
It's extremely critical. Even the Barbie movie is
Yep.
extremely, while it's a giant blockbuster film, it's
Yeah.
extremely critical of capitalism. And I think that that gives me hope that, that there's a wave coming that will change things a
Lost
bit.
you.
Yeah, there's definitely gonna be some editing on this one. Sorry,
Yikes.
Billy.
That's okay.
That gives you hope. Maybe you should finish your sentence. So
That
you
gives
have
me
it.
hope that there's a wave coming, that things will change over a bit, that we will, I mean, even the court case this week that the kids in Montana won,
Yep.
about climate change, like that type of stuff gives me hope that, Gen Z is very different from our generations, right?
That's very
So,
true.
yeah.
Yeah. And even just in the political spectrum, things are shifting for sure. While we're getting closer and closer to fascism, we're also getting closer and closer to, like, humane socialism, so we're maybe not at the top levels of government, but we're starting to hear those voices, and people are swayed by it. People organize around it. And I think, the labor movement, man, they call this the summer of labor. It's pretty much been like a couple of years of labor as far as I can see. Right. But yeah, it's those are very positive trends, I'd say.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
like as we're coming to the end, Chris, tell the people where they can find you online if they want to at you.
Thanks. Pretty much Mandible Judy, Mandible, Mandible as in, bugs mandibles, Judy, .com. That's our website, and at Mandible Judy on Instagram, at Glowmag on Twitter /X. I hate saying that. But yeah,
Fucking
at
Elon.
Glowmag, which is my artist name, and Facebook, there's a Mandible Judy page. And then there's other things.
You also have the YouTube page where they can go back and watch some of the cast streams that we did during the pandemic, where it's some nice, long, sprawling conversations.
Yeah, exactly. So YouTube /youtube.com/Mandible Judy, I think, gets you there. or just search Mandible Judy, all one word, I guess. Because luckily I chose a name that other people aren't using very often. Kind of a weird combination of words. What was the other one I was going to mention? Anyway, yeah. Oh,
Glowmag
Patreon.
is your...
Yeah, and we have a Patreon. Patreon.com/Mandible Judy.
Awesome. Well, Chris, thanks for coming out, and look forward to hearing season 3 of Under Dead Water. I've already read the script, so I know how it's going to end. But I'm looking forward to see how you pull it off.
Yeah, I am too. Thanks, man. Thanks for your help on that. It's really been very.
Yeah, full disclosure, I'm actually helping produce that. So I started out as a fan of Mandible Judy because I grew up on like the 80s, like Stephen King movies and all that other, stuff.
Yeah.
And then Clayton somehow got involved. I think, because he came on in Under Dead Water season 1 as a voice actor.
Yeah, he just auditioned. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, I tipped me off to it. And then he brought me on in season 2 because we started talking and just I was all right. I love the show. So I was telling everybody about it.
You're the best, man. Appreciate
that.
Oh,
well, thank you. Well, thank you for getting it all going. And we will kindly and we will happily hype it when the new season drops.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right.
Good luck editing. I'm sorry. I'm very long-winded. That's like I said, in my 70s upbringing. I'm just, I can't say anything concisely, apparently. But yeah.
It's all good. That will be all for this episode. To keep up with the show, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Scratch Claw Push. If social media isn't your thing, you can contact us at scratchclawpush@gmail.com. This podcast has been a Carcutta Media production. For a full list of our podcasts, go to carcuttamedia.com/podcasts. This recording, or any portion thereof, may not be reproduced or used in any manner whatsoever without the express written permission of the publisher, except for use of brief quotations in review. Copyright 2023 by Carcutta Media, LLC. All rights reserved.